It was a bright, sunny day, and the island of Sodor was bustling with activity. The engines were carrying passengers and goods up and down every line on Sir Topham Hatt's railway. Except Thomas's branch line, which was closed for repairs to a damaged bridge. Instead of working on his branch line, Thomas had been sent to the Sodor China clay pits to work with Bill and Ben. Timothy was the little oil-burning engine that worked at the clay pits too. Bill and Ben had played a trick on both him and Thomas. Tale of the Brave. The morning after the big storm on the island of Sodor, Sir Topham Hatt gathered some of his engines together to make an announcement. Before starting work at the docks, Thomas went back to the clay pits again. He wanted to go back to where he had seen what he thought were big footprints. But the area was closed off, and there were danger signs. It was a busy morning at Brendam Docks. Ships were being loaded and unloaded, and cargo was waiting to be taken away. As an eerie fog rolled across Sodor, Percy couldn't stop thinking about what Thomas had said. Then the dock manager arrived. He was not very happy to see his docks in such a mess. Percy felt very silly for thinking the new engine was a monster, but he was still a little worried. And that night, as he set out to take the mail train, he seemed to see monsters everywhere. The next morning, Thomas woke up early and headed straight to the clay pits. His branch line was still under construction. Meanwhile, poor nervous Percy had gone to Brendam Docks to collect some cars. Percy was very sleepy after staying awake all night, keeping a lookout for monsters. Percy did feel a little silly. Back at the clay pits, Thomas was shunting cars for Marion and trying to see if he could spot any footprints. And then an idea flew into Thomas's funnel. Thomas hadn't meant to upset Bill and Ben. He just wanted to find out where the big footprints had come from, and whether they were footprints at all. It was already dark when Thomas finally returned to Tidmouth Sheds. He was very surprised to find Percy still in his berth. Percy couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Thomas and wondering if he was okay. But Thomas finally finished the mail run and came back, safe and sound. At last, Thomas's branch line was opened again. James was not a happy engine as he puffed to the scrapyard. Meanwhile, Percy had arrived at the docks. But he didn't expect to find Gator still there. Percy was very happy to be pulling the mail train again. Percy didn't feel scared about monsters anymore. He felt brave. While James, on the other hand, felt grumpy. James was so frightened that he missed a red signal, hit the points, came off the rails, and ended up in a pond. The next day, Percy was very happy. Not just because he had taken the mail train again, and not because of what had happened to James, but because his new friend Gator was now working on Sir Topham Hatt's railway. Later that day, James arrived at Knapford Station. The other engines thought what had happened to him was very funny indeed. That night, when Percy set out to take the mail train, James set out into the night too. And he wasn't taking the flying kipper. Percy was back into his routine. Everything was going fine. He stopped in the stations and waited while the mail sacks were loaded and unloaded. And he didn't see anything that worried him at all. Then there was trouble. There was something unusual on the track up ahead. Something big. It wasn't a haystack or a clothesline. It could only be one thing. Percy just wanted to get back to the sheds as quickly as his little wheels could carry him. Later that morning, Sir Topham Hatt came to the sheds, and he didn't look very happy. Percy was more worried than ever. He felt upset that his friends didn't believe him. He had seen the monster, and he didn't want to see it again, especially by himself. Percy was finally delivering the last of the mail when he met Sir Topham Hatt. Percy wanted to tell Sir Topham Hatt about the monster he had seen, but he never got the chance. That night in Tidmouth's sheds, Thomas was waiting to see James. So Thomas took the mail train again, but he couldn't help worrying about his friend and wondering where he could be. Then, Thomas remembered what Percy said about being as brave as Gator and going to a faraway land. The big ship was already starting to leave by the time Thomas came racing onto the docks. Luckily, the captain was able to stop his ship before Cranky was pulled off the docks. Percy stopped at the danger signs. He had had trouble with going past danger signs before. And this was the area where the landslide had been. There was something poking out of the rocks up ahead, and it looked like the cliffs were still unstable. Percy had to move back to get away from the danger. Then there was trouble. Luckily, nobody was hurt. Percy had to be taken to the steamworks for repair. Percy was sad to say goodbye to his new friend, but he was happy that he still had his old friends beside him.